Hello friends, it's Shari, and today I'm making a really fun card. This is a Halloween card, it's a window card, it's a trifold card, and it uses lots of different sets to make a really fun Halloween scene. So it's a longer video, but stick with me because this is going to be fun. So first let's take a look at the stamps that I'm using for this card. I'm using the Booyah stamp set for the ghosts and their little hats and hair. I'm going to be using Perfectly Wicked for those little potions, the books, the cauldron, and one of the cats. I'm going to be using this Fireplace from Cozy Christmas, and then this broom from Frosty Friends. Then I've got this little stack of books from Den Sweet Den, this pumpkin and actually that hat as well from Spooktacular, these little gravestones from Spooky Village, and then this little dachshund from Happy Halloween. And now I'm going to color on my images. I've already stamped them out on some white cardstock with some jet black ink so that I can do Copic coloring. And I'm just doing simple coloring with all these, just a little bit of shading. I'm starting out with those bubbles for my cauldron with those really bright greens. I think this is a really great color for these bubbles that fit in that cauldron. And it really contrasts well with the black that the cauldron is. For the cauldron, I've just got 3 different shades of gray. And you can see I'm starting with the darkest on the edges, kind of pulling it in. Then I'm going in with the mid-tone, pulling it in even more. And then I'll go in with the lighter to get more of a highlight in the center. This just gives this cauldron a nice rounded look. So you kind of get the look of that roundness of the cauldron. This cauldron fits perfectly in that fireplace that we're going to color here in a little bit. Now for the little tombstones, these are actually going to be in a picture frame above the fireplace. So I'm just going to color them, but I'm not actually cutting them out with a die. I'm going to color a scene around them so that it fits into my little picture frame. So I'm starting out with some cool grays, adding a little bit of shading to the bottom. I'm going to color the grass in this image with a darker green, and then I'm going to come in with a lighter green and make a ground that these sit on. Now I'm going to pull this color pretty far out. It's actually a very small frame that it fits in, but just to be safe, I want to make sure that I color in a whole lot more than I'm going to need. So I've started with a darker green at the top, pulling it out with a lighter green, but then I felt like this was maybe a little bit too light, so you'll see I'll go in with an even darker one and darken it up a little bit because I wanted this to look more spooky and dark. Now for the sky, I'm using some blues, but I'm going to make them pretty dark so that it looks more like a night sky. So I've started by tracing around the top of my tombstones, and then I've pulled that color out. Now I'm going to go in with an even darker one, which kind of gives a little bit of shadow around them, which I think is a really nice look. I'm going to blend that out as well. And I'm just going to pull this up even higher and make sure that I have plenty of space covered. Then I'm going back in with that darker color and sort of outlining right along the ground line and right around those tombstones. So to move on to some of these images, this is the witch's hat from the Spooktacular stamp set. I really love this witch's hat and the shape of it, but you can see there are other witch's hats. There's one in Perfectly Wicked, and there's also one in Booyah, which I'm going to color as well for my little ghost. For this, I'm doing the classic purple hat. I did decide later that maybe I should have colored it a different color because the background is going to be purple, but I just left it because to me, a witch's hat is always purple. I've got that bright green belt around it and then that black buckle. For my other hat that's going to go onto my ghost head, I decided to change the colors up a little bit and do an orange hat. So this is really going to stand out. So I'm using 2 shades of orange. I just did a little bit of shading, then I'm pulling it out with that lighter color. And then while I have those oranges out, I'm going to go ahead and color my pumpkin. So again, I'm starting with the dark, kind of going around the edges and the top, and then I'll pull that out with the lighter. And then for this one, I'm actually going to get a third even lighter orange and color right around his face. I want him to have that sort of look like he's glowing, like the candle inside has lit up his face, and it's also going to light up the pumpkin a bit. So I'm just pulling that out with the mid-tone. I'm going to keep going with my pumpkin until he's finished with a green stem and then some yellow for his face. Now to go back to my witch's hat up here, I'm doing a black band around this, or I should say a dark gray, and then a yellow buckle on it. For the pirate's hat, I'm going to make that classic red hat. I'm just starting out outlining it with the lighter color and filling it all in, being very careful around that skull and crossbones. And then I'm going to go in with the darker and sort of pull it up from the bottom so you get a little bit of shadow where it will sit on the ghost's head. Then for the skull and crossbones, I'm just going in with a really pale, cool gray to kind of color that in so it's not white. I'm doing the same thing for the ghost. I'm going to color these all the same way, so I'm just going to show one. I've traced around with that C1, and then I'm going in with the C00 to kind of blend it out. So it stays white in the middle and just has that gray outline. For my Frankenstein's hair, I'm using some greens. I'm starting at the bottom and making that darker, and then I'll pull it out to a little bit lighter at the top. And then of course for the little bolts, I'm going in with a gray. Now I'm moving on to my little cat from Perfectly Wicked. This one is super cute. It might be my favorite. It's going to go on top of my fireplace. So I'm just coloring that with some warm grays. I started with the dark, kind of where my shadows are on the legs and under the cheeks, and then I've blended it out with the lighter color. And then I'm just going to go back in with that darker and kind of enhance those shadows a little bit because they got blended out with that lighter color. And then of course I added a little black nose. Now for the broom, I'm just using some dark browns to color that broom, nothing too complicated. Just pulling that dark color from that band that's around the broom, kind of flicking it out, and then I'll just fill it in with that lighter color. No shading on that handle, and then I'll just add a little bit of yellow to those bands across the broom. Now for my little dog here, I've got a few colors. I'm actually going to change out that E21. You'll see here in a minute. It's a little bit too light. But I'm starting with those shadows, pulling it out with that lighter, that E23. And then I felt that E21 was just way too light. It's not going to blend the way I want it to. So I'm going to switch that out for an E13. And I just felt that this little Halloween scene needed a little dog to go with that cat. I actually am going to add a few more elements around this little dog once I started composing my card. I added a matching little purple witch hat for him that's also from the Happy Halloween set, and the little goodie bucket with a bone in it, the little pumpkin bucket. Now to work on my books, I actually struggle coloring piles of books for whatever reason, so I went and looked at the Lawn Fawn website and found a card by Grace with the Den Sweet Den set, which is where these books are from, and I kind of used that as inspiration for my books. And I'm going to use those same colors that I'm using on these books on the other pile of books. You can see I have colored one there, I didn't like it, so I'm going to stamp out another one and color them a little differently. So this is that newly stamped set of books. These are going to sit on top of my fireplace. And I'm using the same colors that I did in the pile of books that are going to sit on the floor. I'm going to add a little bit of gray to these. These are all the spines of the books, whereas the other ones you saw the pages, which I just think it's fun to kind of mix it up and have the two different sets of books in the one scene. Adds more variety. And then finally, I actually took that gray and added a little bit of a line down the yellow book and the pink book to give it a little bit of shadow. Now for my little potion bottles here, I'm going to color this one purple. and then I'll color the label a lighter color so that I can stamp the little stamps that say bat wings on them. So I can label this with what's inside. So I started out with a little bit of gray, and then I'm actually using a really light teal. I'm using that same color for the bottle of the smaller potion bottle, and then of course that really bright green. I'm doing my shadows again with a really pale gray. And then for my fireplace, I'm going to be really quick on this one. I'm not doing a ton of shading, but I thought it would be nice to kind of enhance those mortar joints of the bricks. So I'm going in with my darker color first. I'm tracing all those lines just to one side of the line, just very quickly. I'm also tracing that outside edge. And then I'll go and fill in with the lighter color. I'm going to do it in strokes all the way across so that you kind of get the linear look of the bricks. And you can see that darker sort of blends out a little bit. It's not quite as dark as it was when I first started. But I'll go back with that darker one and kind of draw that in, give it a little more shadow. But this is actually just the lighter. Just adding another layer makes it a little bit darker. I want kind of that dark, spooky fireplace. So back to my darker one, I can kind of enhance those lines a little bit more. Won't quite do as much as I did before. And then I'll just soften up the harsh lines just with a little flick of this lighter one right below that dark line. I kind of like that the coloring is not completely even. It gives it a nice texture. And then now I'm going in with that darker gray and just adding some little dots so I get even more texture on those bricks. Now for the mantle up here, I'm just going to color this straight with that T5. And then I'll do it again with another layer of that same marker, just pulling it in from the outside edges. Kind of gives it a little bit of shading. Now to add those little details to the books, so I'm going to stamp spells and tricks on the books and then bat wings on that bottle. So I'll use the coordinating dies to cut all these out with the exception of the gravestones. So you can see I've just cut that out in a square. I will trim that down later. But I have all my pieces here and I'm just going to set those aside, and now it's time to work on the card. So I have a piece of narwhal cardstock cut to a side folding A2 size card, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm going to be doing some stenciling on this card. So I'm using some removable adhesive to hold it down. I'm going to line up the brick stencil because we're going to create the outside of the house for the window to go on. And I'll just hold the stencil in place with my magnets. Now I am putting one right in the center because I don't really care if the ink is in the center because I'm going to die cut that out. And I'm using some Storm Cloud ink to ink this brick right onto the cardstock. So this is going to give a nice dark brick with a lighter mortar in the middle. And I'm also trying to not be too even with my ink. I want it to be a little uneven so that it has a little bit more of that spooky look, spooky texture. So you can see some places are a little darker and others are a little lighter. And I'm just moving the magnets, making sure I get all the way to the corners. I do want the corners all the way inked, but the middle doesn't matter quite so much. So you can see that window is going to cover up that part that's not really inked. Perfect. Now I want to do the same thing to the inside. So I've masked off at the fold. Not that that really matters because I'm actually going to cover that part up with some pattern paper. And so this is the back side of the front. So this is the stenciling that I just did is on the back of the part I'm stenciling now. I'm doing the same technique here, just kind of stenciling around, some places heavier than others, some places lighter, and I'm not worrying about the center because again, I'm going to cut that out because that's where the window is going to go. So I'm just checking that out. I kind of missed that bottom corner a little bit. I'm going to go lay my stencil back on there and get that ink just a bit more so that brick goes all the way to the corner. So now I can cut the window out that's going to be the opening, and I'm using the rectangle die from the window scene Winter because I know that this fits perfect with this window frame. I've got 2 window frames cut out of black cardstock, and what I'm going to do is line this up on the front of the card where I want it, and I'm going to trace the inside with a pencil because this die is a little bit bigger, so it's going to cut that part away. The pencil line will just be a guide so that I can line up the die to cut the opening. So I'll just trace the insides, making sure that I get them nice and dark. The first time I traced them, they were a little too light. And you can see those pencil lines there, and I can use that as a guide to cut my hole. Just kind of making sure it is where I want it to be. And I'll just hold that in place with some tape, and I will run that through my die cut machine. Now, I don't know about you, but my plates are very cut up, and they like to leave impressions on the back. You can see how well loved they are. But I want the back of this to be really nice too, because you're going to see it. So what I'm doing is taking a piece of scrap cardstock. This is just some inexpensive cardstock that I use to sketch things out on. And I've put that behind that so that it's protected from that plate that's all cut up. And now the back side is nice and pristine as well. I'm going to glue the window frame onto the front of my card. And I'm using liquid glue so that I can shift this around as needed. So I'm going to line it up where I think it needs to be. The thing is, you can flip it over and see if it's nice and even in the opening, which mine was not quite. So I'm just going to lay it down, center it up, and then I can flip it back over, kind of shift it around, make sure it's straight with that brick stencil. I'm going to go ahead and add my sentiment to the front before I start adding other elements to this card. This sentiment is the Happy Halloween sentiment from the Booyah stamp set, and actually I'm using those bricks to kind of line it up. So I'll just stamp that right below the window. And then now I can move on to some other fun elements. So I'm using this Spiderweb from the Cute Cobweb die set, and I'm going to cut it from some pearlescent vellum. So it's going to have a nice shimmer on one side. And then I'm just going to tuck it up into the corner of the window. This is going to get sandwiched between my 2 window frames. So I've put it to where the pearlescent side faces to the outside of the card. And then the other side won't be as shiny, but you still get that kind of cool ghosty look because it's vellum. Then I'm taking my second frame that I cut out of black cardstock, and I'm just going to layer the 2 together. So you can see I put some liquid glue on the mullions in the middle this time. That way I can line these 2 up, they will stick together and sandwich that spider web right in between. So now you have this nice finished look on the inside as well. Now for the trifold part of my card, this is a piece of vellum. It's cut a little wider than the width of the card, and I'm going to score it to make a hinge. So this is going to be the part that folds out to the right. So I'm just going to fold that down, make sure it's nice and creased. And this piece is going to adhere to the inside of my card. So I'm going to use some double-sided tape so it's nice and sturdy. Just putting it all over that little flap. And then I'm going to pull off the liner paper from that, fold it over, and line it up with that outside edge. So this makes a hinge on the other side. For the very inside that's going to cover up that piece of vellum where it's stuck down, I'm just using a piece of purple plaid paper. Now this is from an older paper pack, but I really like this and I think it looks really good as some wallpaper. But you could use any plaid, or you could even stencil a plaid background if you wanted. And then this is going to perfectly cover up that adhesive on the vellum so you get a nice clean finish. And now for the floor, I'm using a piece of that dark brown wood grain cardstock. I'm just trimming it down to the height I need. It's going to go across 2 of these panels, and then I'll just trim them apart so that I don't have to worry about a fold of multiple pieces of cardstock there in the middle. So even though it's continuous, it's going to have a break in it so that it can fold closed very neatly. And I'm just adding that, lining it up with the bottom of the card. And then now I'm going to make the inside of my fireplace. So I'm just going to trace this out on a piece of white cardstock with my pencil, kind of making the 3D box of the inside of a fireplace. And this is just a guide for my coloring. I'll enhance these lines a little bit with my Copic markers. I want it to look like it's glowing, like there's a fire in here, even though I don't have an actual fire image in my card. So I'm starting out with some yellows and oranges to get that glow. And I'm just going to make sure I pull it all the way past the little pencil line box that I drew and fill it all the way into the bottom edge of the cardstock, because if you noticed when I drew this in, I lined up the bottom edge of my fireplace with the bottom edge of the cardstock. So I've got a nice glow going on, that cauldron fits there nicely, and now I want to bring in some dark, like the part that the light is not hitting quite as much. So I'm pulling in some grays, pulling that towards my yellow. You can see where they're starting to cross over. I'll go back in with the yellow and blend that out a little bit. So you kind of get that bright glow going towards the dark as it works its way out from where the fire would be. And once I've got it looking the way I want, that cauldron looks good there. It kind of covers up some of those pencil lines. I'm going to go in with another gray and just trace those lines of the box so you still get the look of the 3D, but they're not harsh dark lines like they would be with a black pen. Now I have that looking the way I want, so I'm just going to pull in a little bit darker. I wanted some more dark on the corners. And then I'll just trim this out just with scissors. It doesn't have to be cut perfectly, as long as it's a little wider than the fireplace opening to where you can glue it to the back. So I'll just roughly trim this with my scissors. And then I can go ahead and put a little bit of glue around those edges and line it up. And now I have a complete fireplace for my cauldron to sit. So I can go ahead and put my bubbles in my cauldron, just adding a little bit of liquid glue to the bottom. Fill that cauldron up with that bubbling potion, and then I can go ahead and add this to my fireplace. I'm not using any foam pop dots on the inside of this card because everything needs to lay flat since it's the inside. So everything's going to be adhered flat to each other and to the background. I'll go ahead and put this fireplace in here because everything is going to build around this. So I want it to look like it's kind of out from the wall a little bit. So the way to do that is to pull it down past that top edge of the floor, and then it looks like it's kind of protruding into the space a bit. I'm going to take all these elements that I colored earlier and start placing them around in the arrangement that I want for my card. So you can see there how that purple hat kind of blends in. I left the purple hat, but I changed out the bat wings bottle. I did color that orange and cut out a new one so that it stands out a little bit more on that purple plaid background. And then I can just start adding some liquid glue to all my pieces and sticking them down in place. So I've got that little potion bottle in the corner, I have my books, and I have my bat wings bottle that I colored orange. It stands out much better. And then I like this little hat kind of left on top of the books. So this is kind of like the witch has stepped out for the evening or gone to bed, and this is where everything has been left. Got this little cat that's up on the mantle, probably about to get into some mischief. And then of course, because I don't want the back side of this to look empty, I've got that cute little pumpkin from Spooktacular, and then of course my little dog. And like I said earlier, I am going to add a few more elements to my little dog. There is a smaller spider web in the Build-A-House Halloween add-on, so I've cut a few of those, and I'm going to add those to my scene as well. This one I'm going to trim off one of the pieces of the spider web. This one's cut from some black cardstock, and it fits really well kind of in the corner of my fireplace. You can see that other one is in the top corner. That one is cut from some storm cloud cardstock. I really like this spider web up in the corner. I think it frames up this panel very nicely. And then I need to fill in the space above my mantle. So I'm going back to those tombstones I colored earlier. I'm using the Reveal Wheel rectangle window add-on to cut a little picture frame. You can see how that fits in there perfectly. And I'm just going to mark the size I need to trim this to with my pencil, trim it down, and it's going to fit right behind that frame. It was really hard to find an image small enough for this, but these little tombstones fit perfectly, and I think they go really well with my scene. So I've got that layered behind that frame, and then I can just add it above my mantle, and it fits in there perfectly. So I need some spiders to go with my spider webs, and there's a stamp in the Booyah set that will stamp the string that the spider hangs on, so that's what I've got here. And then there is also a nicely sized spider that I can stamp at the end of that string. And I'm going to add one up at the top with that little spider web as well. Now to move on to my ghosts, I need to put their little hats on. So I've got my pirate here that I stamped earlier with the eye patch on. Got my little witch ghost, and then I've got my Frankenstein ghost. So I'm just adding their hats or hair. And then for the Frankenstein ghost, there is a little stamp in the set that has the little stitches. So I'm just going to add that to him. And these guys are going to go onto my vellum piece so that they're peeking through the window, and that vellum piece kind of hides the scene behind. So I'm just going to put some adhesive on the back of each of them, and I'm going to place them using my tweezers so I can see where they're peeking out the window. So I've got my little pirate coming in from the right side, my little witch at the top, and then this guy's going to be in that bottom corner. And then to kind of cover up the back and make it look a little nicer, I just stamped them again on white with black ink, and I'm just layering these pieces behind. So that's kind of the back side of the ghost. I didn't worry about the hats and the hair, just to cover up the adhesive on the ghost. And then of course, nothing's complete without a little bit of glitter. So I've got my green glitter here that I'm adding to my potion. I've got a little bit of black stickles to the buckle of that hat. And then this is where I decided that this little dog needed some accessories. So I've got him a matching hat, and as well as his treat bucket. And then I'm adding some stickles to my ghosts too so that they sparkle. And of course, I'll have to be very careful and prop this up while the stickles dry. Then here is my finished card, and I am just so pleased with this. I love how it turned out. It turned out exactly like my sketch and what I had in my mind, and I just love all these different elements together to create this cute little scene. So I hope today's card has inspired you to take a look at all those stamps in your stash and see how they'll work together to make a really fun card, and maybe try a couple of these techniques. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day and a happy Halloween. Bye.